Hello everyone! Welcome again to my home and studio. I'm Emily Christensen and I teach with CultureWorks, and I'm excited to be here with you again today and share some tools that you can use to engage scripture visually as an artist. And so I was thinking, spring is typically a time where we see renewal and we see restoration pretty clearly. The snow melts, the tulips come up and they bloom and everything is renewed. But not so much this year. This year all of that did happen, but with the restrictions and with fear and with sickness, all of these things seem to be overshadowed a bit. So I wanted to explore some scriptures that deal specifically with restoration and with renewal, because God desires these for us deeply. And I enjoy working through those visually as I encounter scriptures. So I wanted to share those with you today. So here's a quick look at some of the scriptures we'll be working with today, and we'll be using round or pointed brushes and watercolors. I'll start with a bamboo brush, which is one of my favorite tools. It has natural bristles, which means it holds a good deal of ink or paint, and it's pretty forgiving about how it's held and used. You can see that the contrast between thick and thin strokes with a pointed brush is determined by how you hold the brush to the surface and how much pressure you use. This kind of brush comes to a nice point, so it's possible to make a really wide array of strokes. It's kind of fun just to experiment with what it can do. This type of brush is usually used in Japanese and Chinese calligraphy, so I'll post an example of that here. Pointed brushes also mimic other pointed tools like rocks or sticks that were traditionally used to inscribe stones or clay tablets, like this cuneiform tablet you can see here. You can see that a smaller pointed brush still makes a wide variety of marks, and that the variation is determined by and large by the amount of pressure I'm using. Typically, in contemporary handwritten fonts, you'll want to use very light pressure on the upward strokes and heavier pressure on the downward strokes. With these E's, you'll notice that the letters are usually made with several different strokes, but on the whole, pointed brushes can be used to create cursive style writing, and they're much more forgiving than flat brushes. For this first project, I'm working with a verse that's really stuck with me over the past several weeks. I grew up here in Holland, Michigan, and having always been surrounded by water, I didn't realize how deeply I was affected by it until I lived in the Middle East and in North Africa. My soul is really refreshed by the sight and sound and the feel of water. So this verse, "He leads me beside still waters, He restores my soul," really speaks to me. I'm using watercolors today, and I love the natural variation of color and transparency that they give. The first few lines here are a stretched out version of Roman capitals, and I'm holding my brush mostly upright and using a very light touch to create those. For the bottom half, "He restores my soul," that's written in a contemporary cursive, and these again are done with really light upstrokes and heavy downstrokes. I'm using a wet on dry technique. I'm using diluted wet paints right on a dry surface for these letters. For this last painting, I'm using more of a wet on wet technique. So I'm painting with a slightly tinted water and then floating the paints onto the wet surface. This technique results in some really playful variation of color and outline as the paints dry. And you can continue to play with the coloring and the flow as long as your surface is wet. Go back in and add a little more highlights and darker areas just to add some more variation and interest. And when these dry, you might be able to see there's actually an outline that's created by the original color of paint versus the one I floated on top of it. I'll wrap up by showing you a couple other examples of work I've done recently with pointed tools. The first was done with markers and gouache, and this one was done with pointed brushes like we used today. And the third was done with a little squirt bottle called an oiler boiler, which creates really unpredictable and playful thickness in your lines. That one reads, "Therefore, we do not lose heart. For outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day." So I hope you think about ways that God is renewing and restoring you during this time. And I hope you have fun using some pointed brushes and working through some scriptures. Take care.